Hello, everybody. I still see some people pouring in. Very nice to see all of you, or to, I guess, watch your numbers come in. To everybody that's been here before, welcome back. To anybody who's new, thanks for being here. Let's see. There's a lot of you coming in. A lot of you coming in now. Wow. Excited for the book, I see. Okay. Alrighty, I guess I'll just talk slowly. So hello, everybody, and welcome to Book Passage Live. My name is Nick Mitchell. I work just at the San Francisco store for Book Passage. You'll see a lot of people over at the Corte Madera store as well. And from all of us at both the stores, and for many of us at home now, welcome. We here at the bookstore are very excited to bring to you some of the best authors and conversations that you can find out there on the internet. If you've seen one of these events before, as I said, welcome back. But if you're new here, Book Passage is an independently run bookstore out of the San Francisco Bay Area, and back when crowds weren't quite so dangerous for us to be in, we hosted book talks just like these at our bookstores live, as we are now doing the same, but on YouTube, and I think we'll continue to do so in the future. Please consider subscribing by clicking the subscribe button just below the video that you're watching right now. It honestly doesn't cost you anything and really, truthfully does help us out a lot. Also, if you click the little bell right next to the subscribe button and then select all from the drop-down menu, you will be alerted every single time that we go live or even post a pre-recorded author interview, as we do every once in a while. If you want to check out tonight's book or any of the other books that are mentioned here tonight, you can find it all at bookpassage.com. I will be sure to put the link to our video or to our website in the chat just after we're done with our introductions. Finally, and we'll repeat this later throughout the night, but if you have any questions for our speaker tonight, please take the time to write them in the YouTube chat. I will be monitoring them, and I will make sure that everybody sees them in the Zoom call that we're in right now. We don't always get to all of the questions, but they are always appreciated, as are your compliments and general inquiries about people's lives. Now, on to our guest. Maggie Shipstead is the author of tonight's book, Great Circle, and New York Times bestselling author of the novels Astonish Me and Seating Arrangements, which won the Dylan Thomas Prize and the LA Times Book Prize for Fiction. She is a graduate of Harvard and the Iowa Writers Workshop, a former Wallace Stegner Fellow at Stanford, and the recipient of a fellowship for the National Endowment for the Arts. A frequent contributor to Traveler magazines, she is often away from her home in Los Angeles, but we are very, very glad to have her here with us tonight, as well as Book Passage's very own Julie Carlucci. Please, everyone, welcome them both to the call. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. Hi, Julie.
Nick. Hi. Very good. Congratulations on another masterpiece. This book is so layered. It's so rich. I mean, it's really buying like 5 books in one, because it's there's so much in it. But
it's kind of like writing 5 books in one too. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. Well, the research in itself is incredible, and there's so many things about that time period that I love all these stories that come up about the women's role during the war and just history. It's amazing how much they aren't part of the narrative when they really should be.
Yeah. I think there are a lot of sort of overlooked events and people in this book. Which, I guess I should sort of explain what it's about for those who haven't read. Great Circle is about a fictional pilot named Marion Graves who disappears in 1950 while trying to fly around the world north-south over the poles. But it starts even before her birth and goes through her life. So she learns to fly in Montana in the 1920s. She flies in Alaska in the 30s. And then during the war, she is part of a civilian organization in the UK that transported warplanes, all this before her circumnavigation. But it's also about a modern movie star named Hadley Baxter, who's playing Marion in a movie about her life in 2014. And Hadley sort of gets sucked into this question of what was Marion's life really like and what happened to her. So they sort of intertwine, even though the bulk of the book belongs to Marion.
Yeah, it's very I had to keep a little piece of paper on the side to kind of keep everyone straight. So for those that are embarking or haven't read it yet, that might be something, I don't know, maybe for me I need it because just to keep everything organized. But
No, same.
I feel like if I didn't do that, I would lose. There's just it just really is so decadent, so rich in story and character and themes and inner life and the environment. I mean, the surroundings. I mean, we go all over the world in this book. So, Maggie, did you want to start us off with a short reading so that our viewers can get a sense of the voice, and then
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to read just from the very, very beginning of the book, which is from a logbook that Marion was keeping of her flight, and that she leaves behind in Antarctica before she disappears, and it's found about 10 years later. And it's just a few minutes. It's really short. And then I will also read a little tiny piece from Hadley, the movie star, so you can get a sense of the two voices. This is the beginning. Little America 3, Ross Ice Shelf, Antarctica, March 4th, 1950. I was born to be a wanderer. I was shaped to the earth like a seabird to a wave. Some birds fly until they die. I have made a promise to myself. My last descent won't be the tumbling, helpless kind, but a sharp gannet plunge, a dive with intent, aimed at something deep in the sea. I'm about to depart. I will try to pull the circle up from below, bringing the end to meet the beginning. I wish the line were a smooth meridian, a perfect taut hoop, but our course was distorted by necessity, the indifferent distribution of islands and airfields, the plane's need for fuel. I don't regret anything, but I will if I let myself. I can think only about the plane, the wind, and the shore so far away where land begins again. The weather is improving. We fix the leak as best we can. I will go soon. I hate the never-ending day. The sun circles me like a vulture. I want a respite of stars. Circles are wondrous because they are endless. Anything endless is wondrous, but endlessness is torture too. I knew the horizon could never be caught, but still chased it. What I have done is foolish. I had no choice but to do it. It isn't how I thought it would be, now that the circle is almost closed, the beginning and end held apart by one last fearsome piece of water. I thought I would believe I'd seen the world, but there's too much of the world and too little of life. I thought I would believe I'd completed something, but now I doubt anything can be completed. I thought I would not be afraid. I thought I would become more than I am, but instead I know I am less than I thought. No one should ever read this. My life is my one possession. And yet, and yet, and yet. I'll skip ahead just a little bit. So this actress, this is kind of the end actually of Hadley Baxter's story, even though it falls at the beginning of the book because it is circular. And she is in her last day of filming this movie about Marion, and the last thing to film is this crash into the Southern Ocean. After I'd wrecked everything, and Sir Hugo Wolsey, the Sir Hugo, who happens to be my neighbor, started talking to me about some biopic he was producing and pulled Marion's book from his tote bag, a book I hadn't thought about in 15 years. Suddenly I was in a library again, looking at a slender hardback that might hold all the answers. Answers sounded nice. They sounded like something I wanted, not that I could ever quite unravel what I wanted, not that I even really knew what wanting meant. I mostly experienced desire as a tangle of impossible, contradictory impulses. I wanted to vanish like Marion. I wanted to be more famous than ever. I wanted to say something important about courage and freedom. I wanted to be courageous and free, but I didn't know what that meant. I only knew how to pretend to know, which I guess is acting. Today is my last day of filming for Peregrine. I'm sitting in a mock-up of Marion's plane that's hanging from a pulley system and is about to be swung out over a giant tank of water and dropped. I'm wearing a reindeer fur parka that weighs 1,000 pounds and will weigh 1,000,000 once it gets wet, and I'm trying not to let on that I'm afraid. Bart Olufsen, the director, took me aside earlier and asked if I really wanted to do this stunt myself, given, what happened to my parents. Her parents disappeared in a small plane accident. I think I want to confront that, I said. I think I could use the closure. He'd put his hand on my shoulder, done his best guru face. You are a strong woman, he said. Closure doesn't really exist, though. That's why we're always looking for it. The actor who's playing Eddie Bloom, my navigator, is also wearing a reindeer fur parka and has waterproof blood makeup on his forehead because he's supposed to be knocked out by the impact. In real life, Eddie usually sat at a desk behind Marion's seat, but the screenwriters, two aggressively cheerful brothers with Hitler Youth haircuts and Hitler Youth faces, thought it would be better if Eddie came up front for the death dive. Sure, fine, whatever. The story we're telling isn't what really happened anyway. I know that much. But I wouldn't say I know the truth about Marion Graves. Only she knew. 8 cameras will record my plunge. 6 fixed, 2 operated by divers. The plan is to do it once, twice at most. It's an expensive shot, and our budget was never enormous and has now been exhausted and then some. But when you've come this far, the only way out is through. Best case scenario, it takes all day. Worst case scenario, I drown, wind up in memoriam, wind up like my parents, except in a fake plane and a fake ocean, not even trying to get anywhere. You sure you want to do this? The stunt coordinator is checking my harness, all business as he digs around my crotch, feeling for the straps and clips among bristly reindeer hair. True to type, he's got a leathery face, a leathery wardrobe, and a stop-action way of walking from a few imperfect repair jobs. Totally, I say. When he's done, the crane lifts us up, swings us out. There's a scrim at the end of the tank that makes a kind of horizon with the water, and I'm her, Marion Graves, flying over the Southern Ocean with my fuel gauge on empty, and I know I can't get anywhere other than where I am, which is nowhere. I wonder how cold the water will be, how long before I'm dead. I think through my options. I think about what I've promised myself, a Gannett plunge. Action, says a voice in my earpiece, and I push on the fake plane's yoke as though I'm going to fly us down into the center of the earth. The pulleys tip the nose, and we dive. I'll stop there.
Oh, wow. I even got more insight after reading, having you read those 2 parts again, because there's so many parallels. But I remember when I first read it, I was really into Marion and the historical piece of it. And then there was this starlet, and I was like, why is this movie star starlet who would be like hounded by paparazzi? And it just seemed mismatched to me. But now, as I go through it again, it's really not. They feed each other.
Yeah, there's definitely a version of this book that could be argued for that doesn't have Hadley. And that was like a little bit of discussion when we were in edits for it, but and I started with Marion. That was the seed idea of the book, was to write about a female pilot who disappears. And then I started writing it about 6.5 years ago, right when I moved to LA. And most of my friends in LA work in Hollywood in some capacity. And I'd written a previous short story with sort of an intense first person voice from a movie star. And so after I'd been working for about a month writing through Marion's story, I just kind of out of the blue wrote one of the Hadley sections that didn't have any superficial connection to Marion. It was just a section where she is leaving a nightclub with a pop star and sort of publicly cheating on her co-star in this romantic sort of Twilight-esque film franchise she's in, and sort of blowing up her life, just embarking on this scandal. And there was no real connection, but I just knew it was the missing piece. And as I worked forward, I think a lot of it for me was about having a really different tone in the book, particularly as it became quite a long book. I didn't want this sort of uniform loaf of historical fiction. I wanted this kind of acidic note that cut through. And I also wanted a lens to be able to get at this idea of how much is lost in a life. You know, Hadley's sort of looking back at Marion's life, which the readers had a really intimate experience of. And Hadley's sort of trying to piece it together. And you know, it's impossible. There's just so much is lost. It's all conjecture. And she comes to understand that more deeply through the course of the book. But yeah, it just gave me distance I needed and this other voice. But it was a very challenging part of the writing process to sort of try and set these two voices in balance. And Hadley's by far the smaller part of the book, but just dispersing her sections and making sure there were enough of them, but not too much, and making sure her plot was satisfying but not cute. You know, all of that took a few tries and changed dramatically from draft to draft.
Well, you're the how you describe it is like a little bit of acid, like it's a little bit of, you know, to bring out the flavor of all the other, brightens all the other pieces, and it just wouldn't be this. It's just like when you add just enough salt, and if you
Exactly.
didn't add salt, there's so much that's lost from the whole experience. So I definitely see that. What was there a reason, or what was your reason for putting Hadley in the first voice and Marion in the third voice?
Yeah, so the part I read, you know, was in first person because it was from her logbook, but generally the book is in third person. Part of it is that I tend to work in third person. I think it has the most flexibility, and there are aspects within the book, you know, like these sections that are called incomplete histories, where it might, like there's one called The Incomplete History of Missoula, Montana, where Marion grows up, and it sort of goes back 15,000 years and starts in the Ice Age, and then in a few pages kind of moves forward through that history to where the characters are. There's another section that does that with sort of aviation. And so with the third person, that just gave me a lot more room to do things like that, and to sort of come close to Marion and pull away. The book in general is so concerned with scale and with scope and with sort of the impossibility of compressing, you know, a life or an experience into any, you know, form of art or consumable. So, and then with Hadley, because I'd written this previous story and that type of voice, I just liked it. It was a change for me too. Like writing this book, it took 3.5 years to write the first draft, which was 980 pages long, and lost about 25% of its length in the editorial process. Yeah, it was a chance to play around, to have something that's really voicey. The sort of third person that I'm using is a little more neutral. So kind of, yeah, for fun, and again, yeah, for variety, and but for Marion, I wanted that flexibility.
Yeah. And I love all the I was with another bookseller, Meredith, today. We were just she had read it recently, and so we were bantering, and you know, she was reminding me of different things, and there were so many patterns where we're like, there's a circle, or there's another circle, like there it comes full circle, or you know, like Hadley, Marion and her brother and Joey are not raised by their parents. Like there were so many like patterns, and so the question is, what experiences in your life, or what informed you to kind of take up this illustration, or this metaphor of the circle and the pattern? Because there's a lot of it in the book.
Yeah. I mean, some of it was sort of a conscious playing with structure as I was writing.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it has like not a fully circular structure, but a suggestion of one. And sometimes I think, you know, once I have sort of, I guess you would call it a theme like that in my mind, my subconscious is sort of busily working away, like, you know, creating these connections and commonalities. And I also think I sort of thought a fair bit about narrative, and in terms of like some people will argue that much more fragmentary fiction is more representative of our lived experience. And I'm all for books of all different kinds. The more books, the merrier, but at the same time, I don't really agree with that. I think that we are constantly constructing, trying to fit what happens to us into narratives retroactively, and you can even see it in the way we use metaphor conversationally, where we say, what was it like, and you're always sort of trying to or similarly, we're always trying to connect one thing to another to make it all make sense. And so some of what interests me about sort of constructing a plot in a novel is making the most of those connections, or making more of them, and bringing that feeling of not a puzzle, but kind of. That's one thing I like about writing fiction too, is the puzzle aspect of it, making things fit together, and of building something sort of piece by piece.
Isn't that also, but that's kind of life. Like if you look at it from one perspective, it is all interconnected.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I was, that movie about the farm. Have you seen that movie about the farm in LA that you start to see in the movie, this woman tries to bring life back into the soil, and you see very clearly, like if you just sit and watch the birds outside, you see how everything's interconnected. And I felt like the narratives in the story also, like even the play between time, even between Hadley and Marion, even the Ice Age history that you went back to current time, and the tales that are told back then, and the stories that were probably told around the campfire, and how they relate to our modern life today. Like I felt like there's a lot of feeling of that. We're all connected.
Yeah, absolutely. And part of what I thought a lot about too is just like I used the word scale before. And at one point when I was writing, somebody said, if you could describe this book and what this book's about, what would it be? And I said scale, which is, I thought about like a human life is both totally tiny and totally huge. Every human life is sort of epic. And like our planet is totally tiny and totally huge. And how do you start to sort of, connect? Like that's what Marion's flight to her is kind of all about, is how do I measure my life against this planet, this place where we all live. And I think that too is about connection, about figuring out where we fit into all of it.
Right. And then there's also like in the beginning, I always love like the poems and the sayings and the things that are kind of it's like the mouche bouche, or the appetizer, or the kind of like setting of the mind before you read the book. And everything's very how do you say it, deliberate. But the idea of a circle, like you bring in how that, just the physical shape of the circle and how it forms and how it's over and over, and the beauty of that. But then there was also a piece where you talked about like the great circle, and I was wondering, with the title, what was the great, like why did you use great circle when it could have been so many other different types of circles?
Yeah, so at the very beginning of the book, there's an explanation of what a great circle is. So great circle is the circumference of a sphere at its largest point. So on the planet, the equator is a great circle, and then all the lines of longitude are great circles. So an infinite number of great circles intersect the poles. And then, like how airliners fly curved paths, they're always flying a segment of a great circle. So I think what drew me to that, and this is my first book where I've had the title from the beginning. My other two got titled much later. And I think I was drawn to the infiniteness of it, both the sort of inherent infiniteness of a circle, and then all those lines of longitude, all these different possible paths that connect the same 2 points, and that sort of, again, is a life, or how any one life can turn out. And I thought a lot about, there's always this question of, well, why would Marion do this? Why would she fly this circle? And she disappears before the end of it. But I did have that lingering question of, what if she had completed it, what would that have brought her? It's a lot of effort to go to deliver yourself back to your starting point, and then the horizon just stretches out ahead of you all over again. So yeah, the infiniteness of it, and also just the sort of the, I don't know, the cartography of it. I was interested in great circles as they factor into navigation and actual literal flying.
Right. Yeah. It definitely has. It's very multifaceted. The the, the the word and the title itself. Um.
Well, and I will say that's also why I didn't call it the Great Circle. Like
uh,
everyone instinctively wants to put a the there, and it happens so much now that like I almost retroactively wish I'd done it. But because there's so many, I didn't want to make it seem like the subject of the book was her one route, you know? It was more about the idea of the Great Circle, a Great Circle.
the idea, because the parts that you read, Hadley even talks about like a cycle, like, but I still chase it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like, why do I chase it? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why am I get back and I'm always like after this horizon, like what's driving me to it? And it,
Mm-hmm.
there, I think, yeah.
Yeah, and that's something I think those two characters have in common. Like I gave them these sort of factual points of commonality. Were both raised by their sort of dissolute uncles. They're have complex relations with aviation, but they're both kind of trying to figure out how to live. Like, how do I spend my one life in different contexts? Like Marion has the advantage of having this deep instinct the second she sees an airplane at close range that she must do this, and then her life is defined by her need to fly, whereas Hadley is sort of casting about for that. She envies that in Marion, and that's part of what leads her to take this role and kind of dig into Marion's life, is sort of, well, this person had it figured out. What can I take from her? And she sort of reads Marion like she's tarot cards or tea leaves or something.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you think Marion and Hadley would describe the feeling of freedom, their concept of freedom within their life?
Yeah, I think for Marion, it's really tied up in fairly literal mobility. She really wants to be able to go places and go where she wants. She doesn't want to be held down by anything to the point of sacrificing human connection. I think some of it has to do with her era, like to live an unorthodox life as a woman in the 30s, 40s, 30s and 40s took a lot of work. It wasn't just one choice. It wasn't like, well, I guess I will do something instead of leading a domestic life. She's constantly being encroached upon. So she's always vigilant about keeping people out, making it so she can leave if she needs to, with mixed results. And then Hadley has, in some ways, a lot more factual freedom. She's living in a different era. She has more options open to her. There's broader accepted life paths for women. She's insanely rich. She's a movie star, but she's also kind of under this incredible burden of this scrutiny, public scrutiny. She's very famous, and people kind of say boohoo to celebrities, and there's an element of fairness to that. But at the same time, it's a very strange way to live, and she can never quite perform her womanhood correctly. Like she can't be in a relationship in a way that pleases everyone. She can't get out of it in a way that pleases everyone. So she's sort of flailing around, just trying to find a mode of existence that works for her. And so I think for her, freedom might actually be anonymity, but it's too late for that. And she also is hooked on the idea of being famous. So she's a little bit trapped in a different way.
Right. Both are very constricted.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of heaviness. Like, just have to be very mindful of what I say because I don't want no spoilers. But there are like Marion's pressures are much more visible and tangible, and you can see it. Whereas Hadley's they're more invisible. Like they're like the pressures of being a movie star and having your whole life on display. Do you think I wondered this today? Do you think that if you could you have written the same kind of story about two men?
Wow. I think basically no. I mean, the obstacles would be very different. Marion is 13, I think, when she decides to be a pilot. And she's like, great, I'm going to be a pilot. And she's had this sort of feral childhood. And so really isn't aware of what she's contending with her gender. And so then when she kind of dawns on her that she's going to have to pay for pilot's lessons, she's like, well, I have to make money. And even the paths to making money as a teenage girl in the 20s are not, they're pretty limited. And so she disguises herself, semi-disguises herself as a boy in order to do odd jobs. So I think writing about a man who wants to fly, certainly there would be for many, many people, economic challenges, just challenges of access. But I just think, I don't know, like this is a feminist novel, but I certainly didn't sit down and go like, okay, I'm going to write a feminist novel full of my feminist agenda. It was more that just, particularly in Marion's era, but still just being a woman and believing in your own free will is a feminist act. And so there's this element of defiance to the way she lives that would be hard to get at through a male character within her same circumstances.
Right. That's interesting because you are just writing about a life, but like, it's not, you're not trying to inject, you're not saying, oh, I want to just put on display or I want to elevate or illuminate this feminist agenda. It's not that. It's just that it's just about two women's life or this woman's life. And that's reality. That's the world that we live.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my starting point was just sort of like, well, what if somebody is motivated by freedom and adventure, and then the sort of circumstances dictate what it is. But I see a little bit of a parallel because it's been interesting, like while I was still writing the book and then leading up to the publication, I think because of the length of the book and because I'm a woman, I would get a lot of like, do they let women write books that long? And of course there are plenty of prominent examples of really long books by women, but I was always kind of like, yeah, like I can do whatever I want. But there was always this little feeling of also defiance, like, no, I'm going to write this long, complex novel, even though I'm a woman. So it became a little bit meta in that way.
Yeah. That's so, it's an interesting time to have this novel come out as well. I mean,
yeah, which we couldn't have predicted, of course. I think even when we set the publication date, it was like no way of knowing. I think we set the date before the pandemic really happened, but even at the beginning of the pandemic, I don't think people anticipated the duration, which obviously still ongoing. But this moment right now, as things are starting to open up a little bit, and everyone I think is thinking about and feeling these impulses toward freedom.
And all of us having some quiet time to at least ponder, I'm sure, I'm assuming, but to say, well, what kind of life do I want to live? I get to pause now and like, what is a life well lived? Like, what is that? Like, if I can get off my hamster wheel for a while, maybe I will think about it, and maybe I don't want to go back to this Mach 5, sense. So it's just interesting how, we have space to kind of understand what the character is driving at.
Yeah, absolutely. And a question I've been asked a bunch of times too is like, what do you want people to take away from this or think about? And again, there's never any like agenda, but I think just as you're describing in this moment, everyone has this chance to sort of be like, oh, suddenly I realize, like in 2019, I was because I write for travel magazines, I was out of the country for 100 days, I think, or more of that year. And suddenly this year I'm like in my house the whole year. And so it's this question of like, what do I want to see? Like, what's important to me now that I understand that my opportunities are finite? It's not, I can't put everything off forever. What actually matters. And it doesn't have to be about, epic journeys to the ends of the earth. It can also just be, journeys can be local. They can be in your interior self. Yeah, I think it is a powerful moment for reflection, but even maybe especially in this transitional time.
Yeah. Yeah. We have some questions from the audience I will get to as well, but I wanted to also ask that there was a theme, or there was some things we were seeing that about patterns and how people continue to do the same thing over and over again until they learn the lesson and to break out of the pattern. And there's some moments in the book where the characters take on brave, like I guess we would characterize them as brave steps to break out of the pattern. I pause and not say too much, but um, have you witnessed that in your own life, experienced it or witnessed it, like where, you know, people just keep doing the same thing, and then all of a sudden they just they take it upon themselves, take initiative
Hmm.
to not keep going in the same circles?
I mean, I think it's very difficult to do that. I think people do it. I think for me, the process of writing this book ended up really changing my life in kind of unexpected ways. I started pitching and writing travel stories. So during the years I was writing the book, I went to Antarctica twice. I went to the Arctic 5 times. And my comfort zone, sort of by doing something I found frightening or daunting, and having it be successful and enriching my life, my comfort zone sort of gradually started to expand outward and outward. And it's really changed the way I think about risk and reward. And also it's brought me into contact with people who take really major risks that I would not be comfortable, people who are very comfortable in extreme outdoor environments, who undertake these really hard journeys, kind of like Marion's. And I'm not like that, but I'm fascinated by those types of people. So I think, change is possible. I think it tends to be more incremental, I suppose, in life. But I think too that, epiphany is by definition a sudden change, but I think epiphanies can actually happen gradually in that way, sort of like, I take this risk, I get this reward. I take this risk, I get this reward. And that ultimately sort of wreaks a larger change.
Right. Interesting. Because Marion, I mean, she's very, what do you think her internal motivations were? She's very brave.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think I've read a lot about people like this, partly prompted by my agent. When she read my first draft, she was like, why would she do this? Like, why would she fly around the world? And to me, it sort of made intuitive sense, but I had to understand that it doesn't make sense to everyone. I mean, people who are sort of designated as thrill seekers, I read a whole book about this question, and it seems like they don't have a death wish. It's just they have a higher threshold for feeling alive, like the thrill perhaps I get from watching TV and needle pointing. Somebody else needs to like base jump to feel that way. And so I think she's a person like that. She just has a deep instinct. But I also read a fair bit about polar explorers, and kind of one of the most compelling explanations for especially these early explorers who are just, venturing into the unknown, likely to die. They have a vision of themselves doing this thing. And even though it's not supported by any like articulable reason, to them, that very obscurity is persuasive. Like the fact that it seems to come out of nowhere is a reason to do it to them. And I think that's definitely true. You just sort of latch on to an idea and do it. And I think Marion has a bit of that too.
Yeah. She truly is fearless. I was thinking about her whole journey and just remembering the time that she lived in. She really is fearless.
Those early pilots, I mean, the mortality rate was incredibly high, like especially prior to there being usable instruments. Yeah, and that's a question I think about too, is just that drive to do that and to explore in that way. I mean, she certainly experiences fear and has to contend with it. And she's sort of disappointed in herself the first time she's truly terrified, and has to kind of adjust her self-perception. But I also think about Alex Honnold, the rock climber, the free solo rock climber, and how nobody can quite tell if he feels fear. He says that he does, but then on like CAT scans, his brain does not respond to stimuli in the way most people do. So we can't tell if it's responding, but just not detectable, or if he really doesn't feel fear. So it's one of those ways other people are unknowable too. It's just what an emotion feels like to me might feel really differently or feel different to you.
Right. That's the beauty of fiction, right? Like to be able to be in another person's world and just to practice that knowing you think something is not easily transferable or not linear to somebody else. I just think that
I think it's by far the most powerful means of accessing a different consciousness. I mean, I think we get some of that too from watching good acting, but I think it's different. I think reading so much more meditative, and it's, we can never connect perfectly to another person. Like you can never be inside anyone else's consciousness, but the project of human connection, we try our best, our whole lives. And I think reading, it's kind of multi-layered, and that some other consciousness has created these fake consciousnesses for you to enter. But I do think it's a means of being close to other people.
Right. And that whole like we're all together. Like we're no one's alone. Truly no one's alone. But okay, before we go to so these other ones are coming, these questions are coming in. But I have one other one before I share question space is do you feel so we have the time period of the early 1900s and then we have current time, and I wanted to ask, I was like comparing and contrasting the women and their situation. Do you think, or did this even come up as you were writing, are women allowed to ask for the love they deserve?
I think they certainly are. I think it can be difficult to have a good sense of the love you deserve. I was just talking to someone the other night who was saying that her therapist had told her she'd had sort of this disastrous divorce, and her therapist told her to make a list of what she wanted from a relationship, and not in terms of like handsome with a nice car like that, but more meaningful, like deep things. And when she was telling the story, I was like, I've never thought to do that. That's never occurred to me. I think it's so, in some ways, happenstance who we meet and what kind of love we fall into. I don't know. I mean, I think everyone experiences love differently, and I think there's actually a lot of luck involved.
As is, because both characters kind of, I think they get to I'm not going to say. I'm not going to stop.
Well, I will say about the love aspect of the book is also when I was writing it, a friend of mine asked if it was a love story, and I was like, no. But, I came to think that in a way it is. It's a story of all the loves in Marion's life and about Hadley's evolving sense of love, I think. It's not a marriage plot book at all. And I think Marion does have some very meaningful loves, but she doesn't have a traditional partnership.
Right, that's what I loved about it, because it was complex. That's probably more real. But maybe in Marion's world. Maybe.
Yeah, for some people, certainly.
Okay, let's get to these questions that are coming in. We have Angela King. Hi, Angela. She asked, did you take flying lessons, or are you a pilot?
I am not a pilot. I did not take flying lessons. I really thought about it, especially early on, and I just basically did not want to. And I think to fly, you have to want to. And there was something in me that was like, do not do this. And some of it's the some things that are really daunting about it to me are just the spatial awareness of it. This is not my strong suit, you know, and it's possible to really have the wrong instincts. But funnily, my brother is 4.5 years older than I am, and he's just leaving the Air Force now after 20 years. And it's been a while since he flew, but the first part of his career, he was a C-130 pilot. So he flew a 4-propeller cargo plane. And so he was a useful resource, like even just at the beginning when I was trying to figure out what route Marion should take, what kind of plane she should fly. And I gave him some of the flying passages to read as I was writing, just to be like, does this seem right? But I read a lot of books kind of by and about pilots. And then if I came across a more technical question arose, I would also sort of try and seek out the answer to that. But no, I'm not a pilot. But I will also say that I did come to appreciate aviation, the miracle of it, a lot more in the course of writing this book, and just how quickly it changed the world. Like, you know, Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927 in basically like a, you know, laundry hamper with wings, tiny plane. And then he was, within his lifetime, he was present at the launch of Apollo 11, which I think is amazing. So that sort of sweep of just this technology became much more interesting and more moving to me.
Yeah, thank you. It is good to stop and think how much progress it's daunting. It's really daunting. Okay, Deirdre McCrohan asked, why were you drawn to putting Alaska in the novel?
Lots of reasons. I mean, one of the first things I did was establish which line of longitude Marion would fly around the world. And I talked about this with my brother as well. And so it's 1950, and he was like, you know, sort of early Cold War, you wouldn't probably go through Russia. And then it's like, where would you be able to land an airplane? Like if you look at the globe and try to find any line of longitude with enough places to land, it's really challenging. There's just so much ocean. So Alaska kind of ended up being on the line that I figured out that would work or semi-work. And it would have been borderline impossible, but mostly because of Antarctica, which at the time had no permanent bases. And so she would have needed to refuel twice. And so I was very invested in the feasibility. And so there was a real life expedition to East Antarctica that I sort of coincided her flight with. And then on the other side of the continent, there would have been abandoned bases with cached fuel. So I had her go there. Anyway, and Alaska also just has this deep connection with flying. The phrase is that they're the flyingest people. I think that's still true. And it was true even in the 20s and 30s, that here's this place where, you know, for reasons of the landscape and the scale of it, it's incredibly difficult to build and maintain roads. People live in this really scattered way. And so almost immediately airplanes, you know, they saw the utility of airplanes. So something that took a week with a dog sled took a couple hours with a plane, and you could suddenly get supplies to more remote places. And it facilitated the exploration of Alaska as well. So there have always been a lot of pilots in Alaska. There's some really interesting, you know, books and stories from pilots in that era. And I've also been there just twice, I guess. But it was helpful to have been to places where I could see the landscape and feel like I could render it more vividly.
Oh, it's very vivid. It's perfect book. I mean, if you had to be like grounded in no air travel, it's the perfect companion. Get a very good sense of the different locations, and I appreciate your experience as being a travel writer, because it comes through. It's very vivid. But just to tap back into the amount of research that you had to do, you know, to the feasibility of where she could land and where she could fuel back in that time period. What other things in your research did you discover that really made you pause and say, wow?
Oh, so many things. I don't even know if we've mentioned that Marion has a twin brother, but their uncle is an artist. He becomes an artist. And I came across an old PBS documentary about combat artists who I think they existed in World War I as well, but in World War II were recruited or from within the ranks or without by every branch of the military to document with oil paints and with drawings what they saw in the war, and their sort of memo to them said, capture the spirit or essence of war. And so coming across that sort of redirected Jamie's plotline for me, I said, oh, I have to use that. I think in researching Missoula, I came across an account of when they kind of cleaned out the red light district, and about prostitution and sort of as it ebbed and flowed with mining and logging and railroad building. So there's a sequence in a brothel in Missoula that came out of that. This connects to one of the questions that's in the chat, so I'll kind of answer it. But I also came across these historical accounts of this Native American person named Sitting in the Water Grizzly, who was a real life person, and he was what we would probably call transgender now, or two-spirited. And these explorers kind of first encountered him as a girl who married one of the men in David Thompson's party, and then kind of wreaked all kinds of havoc, disappeared, reappeared later as a man with a wife and sort of this business of giving prophecies. And he shows up in David Thompson's diaries, and John Franklin, who later disappeared himself, in his journals. A Jesuit priest writes about him. And it's so interesting to me because I think the Native people were so other to these explorers already that the sort of gender shift really didn't faze them. They're just like, this is interesting, like Sitting in the Water Grizzly's back, and now he's a man. And so I included that in the book for the viewers asking why it's in the book. And there's a reason that comes much later, but also just as a legend that also informs Marion's perceptions about gender, and her, there wasn't any vocabulary that we have now for gender, but I suppose what we might call gender fluidity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then the last question here is, when do you write? What is your medium? Pen and paper or computer?
Lately, I have not been writing fiction. It's a pretty all-encompassing thing to get a book ready. Oh, my dog's going to put in a cameo. Hi.
I like that.
Gussie.
Hi.
He is a large one. So in a perfect world, I would ordinarily get up in the morning and I like to bribe myself with coffee. So I'm like, you can go get a giant iced latte. There's a cafe down the street from me here in LA, but you have to take your computer and you have to work for a while. And, that's something I've really missed during the pandemic, was just not having just the enlivening presence of other people sort of being around. And so, I would usually work in the morning. I would tell myself I was going to work in the afternoon as well, but I wouldn't. When I was younger, I worked at night a lot, but not so much anymore. And then because I traveled so much in these years, there were also just long periods where I didn't work for even a couple months, and then came back to it. But I work on a computer. I used to write with pen and paper quite a lot, and now it's just not efficient enough for me, particularly with a book of this length. And I use a writing program or app called Scrivener, which I've been talking up all over the place. And I don't think I could have written this book without it. Like, just writing this as a Microsoft Word document would be incredibly unwieldy, or having separate documents for all the chapters. And Scrivener allows you to sort of take all those chapters and store them in one place. And I can move the different pieces of the book around, and I can set them side by side. And it's a really powerful organizational tool. So that's what I write in. It also has a word processing component.
Wow. So like it takes the place of like the Post-it note.
Yeah. Everyone's like, do you have a bulletin board with like thread? And, and I was like, no, I have Scrivener.
Those are the questions that have come through. And I wish there was more like a book club, because there's so much more I want to talk about. maybe during the paperback.
That would be wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all your questions. They're great.
Yeah. So thank you. And this book is such a treat. And it's also, I forgot to mention, I'm not wearing my first edition hat, but it's also our June first edition club pick for Book Passage. So all of our members, they haven't, I think I've announced it, but so this is coming, a signed first edition copy is going to be mailed to your door, and we've got lots of members all over the world, so that's going to be exciting as well. So but thank you so much for spending your time with us this evening, and I'm really excited for you. I think that I don't think that Meredith, one of our booksellers, said, I have not read a book like that in so long, where it's just it really, it's a journey, but it comes back together so tightly and so, like, I don't want to say anything more, but it's just
That's very kind. Thank you. And yeah, it's been a total pleasure.
Alrighty then. Thanks again, everybody, for coming out. The book is Great Circle. I think this is where we will end here for the night. Wherever you are in the world, thanks for either staying up late or maybe waking up early, depending on how far away you are, and hanging out with us. A special thanks to Maggie, and an extra special thanks to Julie for coming out tonight. There were some behind the scenes things that Julie really pulled a rabbit out of her hat for us. So it was really, really lovely. Once again, the book is Great Circle. You can purchase it right at bookpassage.com. Links are in the YouTube chat right there. If you happen to not live in the Bay Area, as many of you do not, we will ship it right to your house if you order it from our bookstore. We're really good like that. If you enjoyed the chat and you want to see more, you can subscribe to us by clicking the subscribe link. And if you extra enjoyed the chat, you can click the thumbs up and appease our YouTube overlords and make sure that they send out our interviews to as many people as possible. Other than that, we have been Book Passage Live, and we are absolutely excited that you managed to come here today, and we 100% hope that you can make it to the next one in the future. Thank you one last time. Bye, everybody.